Welcome to the solution video for the Soda Machine Source Control Challenge. So we're going to add our project to source control. So let's go right over to, instead of going to Visual Studio, we'll go to just our Windows Explorer. This is where I place a source code. So the source code's in D, demos, and the Soda Machine folder. So I'm going to start by creating a local Git repository for this. Now, if you have Git installed, and it's fairly easy to get installed, in fact, let's pull that up. If you go to git-scm.com, you can download and install the latest version of Git if you didn't have it already installed. So install that, follow the options. Pretty much you can just, whatever the defaults are, you can use. The one place where you may want to deviate is when it asks you about what text editor to use. You can use Notepad++, which is my preferred tool for doing any type of Git work instead of the built-in version they use. So git-scm.com, download the latest for your version, probably Windows, but it changes based upon what you've logged in and on with your computer. So if you're on a Mac, it should say download for Mac. If it didn't, you could go to the Mac build or whatever. So with that, now we have that done and installed. One of the options it gives you is to add these right-click options. So Git GUI here and Git Bash here. Now I'm going to use Git Bash because it's the command line for Git, and it allows it to be universal. It doesn't matter what version of Git you have installed, pretty much, or what machine you're on. You should always have access to the command line for Git. If I teach a particular user interface for Git, it will almost certainly change over the next 6 months to be almost unrecognizable. But if you understand the basics of Git and how it works, first of all, the command line becomes simpler. It's not as intimidating once you've used it a few times. I do have a video on my YouTube channel that's an intro to Git, and it will walk you through how to use Git in as simple a manner as I can make it. So with that, we're going to use the command line and just see just a few commands to make it really quick to do this, and even sometimes quicker than trying to go through a user interface like I have here, Git Kraken, which is a really nice free user interface for Git. So if you do want to have the user interface, you really don't want to touch the command line for whatever reason, Git Kraken is a nice option. We're going to do Git Bash here. And that brings up a bash window, which is very, very similar to what you'd see a command prompt. It just uses more Linux-style commands rather than the Windows commands you're used to. No problem. Very little changes. It's very, very close to what we're already used to. So the very first thing is we don't have anything source control related in this folder. Now I have turned on the hidden folders, so you can see hidden folders. So you see the .vs folder, which means I've opened this solution file in Visual Studio before, and that's just some settings that Visual Studio uses to do personal preference stuff, like what the last thing you had open was, and those kind of things. Now, Git installs in a .git folder that's also hidden. So you won't see it, but since I've got the hidden folders turned on, you will see it. So there's no Git here yet. There's no source control. So I'm going to say I'm already in this path, so /d/demos/soda machine, which that's this path right here. So since I did right-click and said Git Bash here, it opened to that particular path. Now I can just say git init. So git space init, I-N-I-T, and hit enter. And what that's going to do is initialize a Git repository in this directory. So you can see now we have a .git folder in our File Explorer, and inside there is some folders, hooks, info, object, refs. You don't ever have to dive into this Git folder. I won't say ever. 98, 99% of the time, you will never have to go in this folder. In fact, if you go in that folder, probably you're doing something wrong, because Git just runs. It just works. So you don't have a ton of messing around with the folder structure and doing things like that. We're going to have a problem with Git will be when you mess something up, and you can undo that or rework that in the console, in the bash window here. So don't worry about going into that folder. All right, so now we have, notice that now it says master at the end here, which means I'm the master branch. But if we do a git status, we'll see we're on branch master. We have no commits. We have untracked files, which means we have files in here, but they've not yet been monitored by Git. So Git has not paid any attention to these files. So there's nothing added to the commit, but untracked files are present, which means that Git is not tracking these, but they're new, they're different than the blank folder that it expects. Now, if I just did, and I'll do a clear here first, if I just did git add and a dot, what it would do is add all of those untracked files to my staging location in Git. So Git has 3 phases. I don't want to go too deep into teaching Git because hopefully you know it already, and if not, up here, okay? So it says on branch master, no commits yet, but we have changes to be committed. So we have new files, and we have a whole list of files. All right. So down here, notice we have a DLL file. We have a IDE file. We have actually everything inside a .vs folder. Remember I said that's the personal preferences folder for Visual Studio, personal information. So that's probably not right. The bin folder where we have release information, that's probably not right. And there's a lot of files in here. And if you're thinking back on our project, we didn't seem to have that many. But notice the OBJ file or folder and the bin folder. So there's a lot of folders in here we don't want to add to our source control. And that's really a mess. Now I could remove all of this manually from the staging and start over. Or I could manually add the ones that I want. But I want to show you this as well. I'm going to close out of Git Bash. See this Git folder here? Delete it. I just took my project out of source control. It's no longer in source control. Now if I right click and say Git Bash, notice it does not say master afterwards. And now I can say git init again. Now I've got an initialized but empty repository. So git status, again, untracked files but no commits. Nothing has been tracked or staged. So how do I get around the idea of adding files I don't want to add? Well, let's go back to our browser, and we're going to do a search here for Visual Studio git ignore, one word. And the first result you get is a GitHub link. And this is to the standard Visual Studio git ignore file. And so a git ignore file says don't add certain files. And so in this case, it says don't add a SUO file, don't add user preferences, Don't add the debug or release folders. Don't add the obj folder, and so on. Don't add the .vs folder. So these are standard Visual Studio things to ignore. There's a lot of stuff in here. In fact, I believe there's stuff in here for like .project and install shield and some other third-party things. Click once. And even, I believe, ReSharper has some stuff in here. So there's a lot of stuff in here. Maybe it doesn't. Anyways, there's Code Rush and others. But there's a lot of stuff in here. It's pretty much standard. So I'm going to download and use this gitignore file. So what I'm going to do is I am going to grab that folder path. So let me grab the folder path first. And I copy that. And then in GitHub, there's this thing called raw. And what the raw does is it shows you the actual file. Notice visualstudio.gitignore. Now I can just right click on this file and say save as. I can paste in that location. And I'm going to rename this. So instead of visualstudio.gitignore, it's going to be just .gitignore. So it has no words or no letters before the dot. It's just .gitignore. And that's the standard for Git, for a gitignore file. So I hit OK. It's going to download. And now with that, we have this gitignore file. Now let's open up our bash again. We're going to clear the screen. Clear. CLS is for the command prompt. Clear is for bash. And it's one of those little details, little differences. Now I can say git add dot. Just like before, the only difference is we now have that .gitignore file, which we're going to add to our repository along with all the other files that are correct to add. I will clear the screen again and let's do a git status. Notice that's a much shorter list. It didn't even scroll off the page. So we have our no commits, but we have changes to be committed. We have our gitignore file, and we have our solution, our text files, our JSON files, our CS files, our CS proj files. So they're just the files we want, not the files that are user-generated or auto-generated for us, just the files that pertain to our project. Okay, so we have just those files. Now we can commit this or create a commit. So git commit, and what commit does is it will take whatever is staged, which right now everything is staged. That's at git add dot. So git commit, I'm going to create a commit message right on inline. So -m, and then quotes, I will say initial commit. And this creates a commit message right in line. It's kind of the shortcut. Typically I don't do this, but for initial commits, it's pretty clear what it is. So I don't have to have that description of what's going on. For everything else, I do a full commit, so I don't do any of this. I say git commit, and it's going to open up, in my case, Notepad++, because that's my text editor of choice for Git. And I'll type out the message or the header, and I'll hit enter twice, and then I'll give the description. And so once I save that or close that, then that will use that message as the commit message. But for this, for really quick, -m and the commit message works just fine. I hit enter, and now it has added 19 files. Okay? So if we do a clear, we do a git status again. We're on the branch master, nothing to commit. The working directory is clean. We do have a commit in the list though. So that takes care of the primary challenge, which was to create that local Git repository, put the existing code in it, and create the initial commit, and not commit files that should not be committed. So no DLLs, nothing from the bin folder, the obj folder, or the .vs folder. Those are all ignored. All right, so that's the primary challenge done. The bonus challenge is to now add this to Azure DevOps. So let's actually open up our Visual Studio. I actually have Azure DevOps open. So you can create your own DevOps platform. Hopefully you've already done that. If not, go to dev.azure.com and you can sign up for, I'm already signed in. Dev.azure.com, and what we'll do is, it's going to redirect for me. Let me give you an incognito window so you can see it. Bear with me. All right, so dev.azure.com. And it's going to say, okay, start for free. It's free for up to 5 people to use. And you'll get Azure boards, Azure pipelines, Azure repositories, test plans, artifacts, and a whole bunch of extensions, all for free. So we're going to use this in the next few videos. We'll do continuous integration, continuous deployment, and all the rest. So definitely get signed up for this. It's free and a great platform to get started with. There are other options for continuous integration, continuous deployment, like Octopus Deploy, that are also free, but this is a good starting point to get you going. Okay, so now we have this. Hopefully, we're going to create a new project. I'm going to call this the Soda Machine. Actually, no spaces. So Soda Machine Challenge. I'm going to get private, and I'm going to use Git for my version control, which is standard. Server. And so if Azure DevOps were to go away, no problem. You can still have your Git locally and move it to GitHub with hardly a problem. So in fact, it's basically a couple commands, and that's it. In this case, we have an existing repository we're going to push in the command line. So we're going to run these 2 commands. I'm going to copy these commands. Actually, I'll copy just the first one. So this is the first one. Sorry, it's a little small. You can do this. Let's just do this. I'm going to copy the clipboard. I'm going to open up Notepad just to show you what the 2 commands are. And let's make sure that word wrap is off. So there's 2 lines of commands. It's just that this scrolls off the page. All right, so this first one, let's copy this, just this one. We're going to run it in our Git bash window. It's still in the same location. So it's still under master. We have the 1 commit. What this first line is doing, so I'm going to paste this in. This first line is adding a remote. So git remote add. So our remote is a remote repository. So you can connect to another repository or another copy of the same repository somewhere else. And so we're adding a remote, meaning we're going to add somewhere else that these 2 will be in sync. And we're going to give it a name, an alias, and we're going to call it origin. Origin is the kind of industry accepted name for the main repository. Again, no server, that's no one master server, but think of it kind of like a master server. This is the ultimate source for truth. This is the main location. So we call it origin, kind of like the place I came from. So git remote add origin, and then here is the URL to origin. All right, so that's the full URL. And if you don't already have the credentials in Git to talk to your repository, it's going to prompt you to add those. And you just type in your username and password, and it's going to create an authorization for that. But in this case, I already do, I believe. So just hit enter. And now I've added a remote project. I've added this Azure DevOps as my origin, my upstream. So now I can say git push, which I'm just typing out this command they gave it, the second line. Git push -u. So -u, what it's going to say is I want to set this as my upstream, meaning this is a shortcut. Okay, so I say origin --all. So by doing a -u, I'm saying, all right, from now on, if I don't specify which one to do, I want you to go to origin. That's what I said as part of the bonus challenge, was making sure you can do a git pull without having to say git pull origin master. So by saying this is my upstream -u, I'm saying if I say git pull, I want you to pull from origin. If I say git push, I want you to push to origin. It's just a shortcut. Now --all says all the branches. Just push every branch I have, which is just one, master. All right. So with that, I hit enter, and it's going to push up my branch to Azure DevOps. And it's going to set up to track the remote repository branch master from origin. Which means, let's just do a clear here. If I were to say git pull, it's going to pull from origin master. And this is already up to date. If I say git push, it would push to origin master. All right, so it's all done. We're all done. Those 2 lines that I copied and pasted essentially, those were all I needed to do. How do I know that? Well, if I go off of this and refresh this, notice that I now have files in here, all my files. You can read the files, you can look at them, you can see their history. This was from the initial commit. You can compare it over time, which is nothing to compare it to. But there's all the files in my project or my solution. My commits, there's only one commit, the initial commit, and that was today. So that's all I had to do to add my local Git repository to Azure DevOps and make sure that was my origin. Now, if you already had an Azure DevOps project, let me just, real quick, I'm going to do this just to kind of show you what this might look like. So if I just create a new one, let's just create test, that's fine. I don't care about it. I'll delete it in a minute. But if you create a repository and say, I'm not going to push an existing one, I am going to initialize with a README. And let's just say you add your Visual Studio Git ignore as well. And initialize it. This now has a commit. I can't then take my local repository, this one here, I can't take this and push it up to here and say this is origin. Because they have a conflict. Because it comes from 2 different places, the starting point. Think of Git as one continuous trail from point A to point B. Point A being when we just started, we had no code, to point B being where the code is today. And there may be a lot of stops along the way, but that's the journey of your code. Now, if we look, this journey started with adding git ignore. Notice the commit here, we have added readme.md git ignore files. And that's the first commit. That's the first step along the journey for this repository. if I were to push this repository, or try to, that has a different starting point. The starting Now, inside of this test folder or wherever, you can even do it inside demos, but I wanted to have it really isolated. Do a git bash. All right, so now there's nothing in here. I'm not going to do a git init, but instead I'm going to do a git clone and then paste in that URL that I was given. All right. What this is going to do is it says, okay, we've got a remote repository that's already started. I want to now work on it on this computer. So git clone. Okay, I cloned it in. It's unpacked. And you'll notice now that I have a new folder called test inside of test. And in there we have a .git and we have a git ignore and our README file. All right, so this is now the repository for my test project. All right, this folder right here. Well, I can come back over here to Soda Machine. I could copy. Let's copy everything except for the git ignore. We could copy the git ignore too if you wanted to, but we're not going to. I'm going to copy it all. I'm going to come over to my test folder that has the .git folder in it. I'm going to paste everything in here. Now I'll go back. Actually, you know what? Let's not even do that. Let's now open git bash here. Notice we're in the master branch. If I do a git status, you'll see that we're on the branch. It's up to date with origin master, but we have untracked files. So I can do the git add dot. I can clear. I can say git status to make sure I've added them correctly. I have. Notice it's just the files I need because I have that git ignore file there. Now let's do a git commit -m. Let's still call it initial commit or initial code commit. Hit OK, clear this, and I do a git push. And since I cloned it, it has already set that as origin, so it knows how to do this, and it just pushed the files up. So now if I go back over here and I refresh my file list, notice I have all of my files here. And if I do my commits, I now have my initial or added readme and git ignore files, and then my initial code commit. My story now has a point A to point B because point A was this add the readme and git ignore. Then I just added my files manually and committed them as the second commit, not the first commit. I can't have two starting points for my story. I now have one starting point, and then the next step along that journey is added the source code. So either way you can do this, but you just can't have two starting points for the same story. All right? So with that, either way, and I'll delete this one. Let me show you how to do that. So in the lower left-hand corner, project settings. And if you scroll down the bottom, delete. Now, this is a thing that once you do this, it's gone. So make sure that you don't want this repository or any of the files that you can't recover this. In fact, it tells you You have a 28 days to recover project. Don't rely on that. All right. Assume they're absolutely gone. But you have, just to confirm, you have to type the name of the repository in the box here. Just a little quick tip. It's kind of defeats the purpose because this purpose is to make sure that you're intentionally deleting this. But you can double click here, copy, and paste in the box. It makes it a little bit faster. Hit delete. And now that project's gone. Setup machine's still there. We're going to leave setup machine here and leave this open and running. You can have as many repositories as you want, so not a problem. But just note that that would be how you would start things if you started them on the server first and then wanted to add existing files to it. Okay, I've done it both ways. I kind of like doing it locally first and then pushing it up, but it's up to you. All right. So with that, that's our bonus challenge as well. We took our local repository, added to Git to Azure DevOps, and made sure it was the upstream, which really that all the work's done for us. They give us the 2 commands to run. Anyways, verified that yes, a git pull or a git push will assume origin master as the name or as the location. Okay, origin being the upstream and master being the default branch, the branch that we're on. Okay, so with that, that's the bonus challenge. We've done the primary challenge of creating a local Git repository, and now we moved it up to Azure DevOps. All right, so now we're all set up for things like continuous integration, or adding NuGet packages, or adding even our Azure boards work and merging that into our commits. Okay, thanks for watching, and as always, I am Tim Corey.